Welcome, everyone, to the wide receiver edition of the Fantasy Football Factory Pod as we get ready for the 2022-2023 NFL season is right around the corner. We've hit August. Training camp's in full swing. I'm Barstool Mintzy, joined as always by Steven Cheah. We've gotten through the quarterbacks. We did tight ends. We did running backs. But I'm stoked about today's episode because the depth of the wide receiver position in this NFL passing league is fascinating from a fantasy sports perspective.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people base their league strategy around wide receivers if you go zero RB and you go heavy on the receivers. I think this year, as we talked about in the running back preview, is a great year to do it just based on the very odd structure of the running backs this year with a clear number one. Wide receivers, if you have a first-round pick, depending on where you land, I think this is going to be a good area to target, just due to the high floor that most of these guys offer.
Yeah, and I feel like the top guys, and we're going to get into that pretty quickly, the top four wide receivers, I feel like the floor you mentioned is very high. I think the bust factor is low.
Yep.
And, you know, when you're talking about a first-round pick, we discussed it in the running backs episode last week, that the worst thing that can happen is taking an injury-prone running back and having them go down. It's just like it's a fantasy death sentence. And so I would rather take a high-floor receiver that I feel like the injury risk is less, and I know the target share is very high on a high offense. And we can just jump right into that with the guy that really made our name in the Fantasy Football Factory Pod last year. You and I, and we'll go back, I'm sure, and try to find some clips to when we talked about it.
It's interesting that we're both on the same page here and that we're both buying Cooper Kupp because Robert Woods is going in front of him in fantasy drafts. Why?
Now, so McVay's used very interesting play design with Robert Woods. You know, they run end rounds, they get him the ball and all that. But I think Kupp is the fit with Stafford. I mean, we saw Stafford in Detroit like to throw to Amendola, slot guys, and tight ends a lot.
Golden Tate,
Yep. I love Kupp in this offense. And we'll get to him on my props later. I think he's going to catch a ton of balls, and if he stays healthy, he could be huge this year.
He has had more 100-yard games than Robert Woods in every season the past 2 years. More touchdowns. Like Cooper Kupp, right now he's going at wide receiver 19 in ADP. Robert Woods is wide receiver 16. I don't get it. Robert Woods had 200-yard games last year. He finished as wide receiver 13 in half-point PPR. His 15 touchdowns over the past 3 seasons. Yes, they're going to take a step forward with Matthew Stafford over Jared Goff. I think everyone is kind of united with that stance. But I do not get Robert Woods over Cooper Kupp otherwise. Like, Cooper Kupp is the superior fantasy receiver.
But we were as big on Cooper Kupp as maybe anybody in fantasy going into last year. We loved it with Stafford, and he ended up being the number one receiver by far. He was a Super Bowl MVP. Hell, he almost had 2,000 freaking yards.
Yep.
And he carried me to my $500 league championship for the second time in 3 years. If you had Cooper Kupp and you listened to us last year, you probably did pretty dang well in fantasy. And I feel like that is from our listeners that DM me. Yeah. That's literally the number one thing I hear about was the Cooper Kupp last year.
Yeah. And you and I think we're pretty aligned. I like to think we're both pretty sharp guys and you know, put our work in the fantasy community. And every outlet last year had Robert Woods as the top Rams receiver. And we were the only one that I saw, and I looked at a lot of them that had Cooper Kupp higher than Woods. Not only that, but we had Cooper Kupp. I think we both had him like around the 11 to 14 range.
Somewhere in there.
Receiver. And like most outlets had Robert Woods kind of in the 14 to 16 area, and Cooper Kupp more in the 17 to 20 range. So we were kind of beating that drum that this was the guy to target with Matthew Stafford coming to town. So I think that we helped a lot of people out last year, which was great.
Yeah, and we're going to try to identify. I don't know if anyone's this year's Cooper Kupp because the year he had was just so unbelievably historic. But we're going to go through here and dig and try to find them. But the first question about Cooper Kupp, and as always, we're looking at the Barstool Sports book, and we're going to give you our top 5 wide receiver props at the end of this.
Yep.
You know, he got 1,900 yards last year.
Yeah.
But last year, clearly by far his biggest year. And so going into this year, he's the number one receiver in fantasy. It's established. Stafford's back.
Yep.
There's no reason he shouldn't be. Allen Robinson now signed as the number 2 to replace the Odell Beckham, Robert Woods combo after both of them got hurt and left. The question is, what do you expect out of Kupp for the encore? And his over under, I believe, was 1,350 and a half, which I think seemed low. And I almost took the over because the beauty of Kupp is the consistency. Yeah. Dude gets open. Offense is designed for him. They use him well in the red zone. I'm not saying 1,900 again, but I thought that he was getting lowballed.
Yeah, he had consistency as an understatement. He had one game below 90 yards receiving.
That's
last year, which is crazy. As a fantasy manager, you cannot ask for anything more. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to see where there's going to be a fall off here. Like we look at Jonathan Taylor and it's like, all right, well, this guy's, 24 years old, 23 years old. I don't see him, based on his workload, how the team is built. They didn't, they obviously changed quarterbacks, but I feel like Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan's somewhat of a wash. It's like, all right, that he should be able to repeat. Cooper Kupp, very similar scenario. Like, yes, they lost. Robert Woods was hurt last year, so he didn't play many games. They had Odell Beckham. Both of those guys are now gone. But they bring in basically version 3 of that in Allen Robinson. So they have guys that are going to still take some of the defense's attention. Sean McVay does a great job moving him around. We see him lined up in the backfield sometimes on wheel routes, catching passes, and then matched up against linebackers and safeties. So I don't see anything glaring that's like, all right, well, this is the year Cooper Kupp falls off. I mean, he's 29 years old. He's in great shape. Good guy. He's not a guy who's built on speed like that, he could lose a step. Like he ran, I think, like a 4.62 40. Like he's not that type of guy. He's solidly built though. Like you think of like a classic like white slot receiver, and it's like, all right, well, this guy's undersized and shifty. Cooper Kupp, 6'2", 210. Like he's a solidly built guy, and he can line up anywhere. So I envision him having another great year. Replicating last year, I think, is going to be near impossible, but I think we both have him as wide receiver 1 again this year.
You look at the wide receiver position, it's kind of known for being a diva thing, and I'm not worried about Kupp ego at all. I know he got paid, but this is a dude that came out of Eastern Washington.
Yep.
He's a guy he's the type of guy that's like, well, now I got to go prove I'm worth this money.
Yep.
And I'm not worried in the least. I think, I don't know. Like I said, 1,900 yards and the stuff he had last year, maybe a stretch, but if he stays healthy, I expect 1,500 or 1,600.
Yeah, absolutely.
And my question to you is, let's hypothetically say, we talked about this last week on the Running Backs podcast. Jonathan Taylor's number 1, period.
Yep.
If you have the number 2 pick, are you considering Cooper Kupp? Because I am. I am.
Unless you're in a 2 quarterback league, I'm taking Cooper Kupp. If you're in a PPR league, I consider going Cooper Kupp number 1. I don't think I do, just because Jonathan Taylor is like just such that gem, that bell cow workhorse running back who is going to be double-digit touchdowns, who's going to be right around 100+ yards every game, a threat to go for multiple touchdowns every game. But I am considering it. I don't think I do it, but Cooper Kupp is pick number 2.
Yeah, I agree. And I come back to the point, we're going to get through a lot of guys, so I'm not going to hammer it forever, but I just think the floor is so high. And when you're taking that number 2 pick, you look at, I love Derrick Henry, but he's still 28 coming off an injury. You look at the other running backs we discussed last week. I just feel a hell of a lot safer with Cooper Kupp.
Yep.
And there's depth at running back. I can figure it out, the 0 RB thing. But if I got Cooper Kupp as my number 1 wide receiver, especially in a full-point PPR, half-point PPR, I'm feeling great, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about guys who maybe they're not going to have a 2021 Cooper Kupp season, but just like breakout guys that you think could really step up this year.
Well, there's a few. The thing with this position, and this is what's going to be fascinating about today's pod, is what blew me away when I was going through doing my rankings last night was, your top 10, top 12, I think are pretty established. But then right after that, from like 12 or 15 through 35 or 40, you could make an argument for like 30 people moving around in the rankings. And so what that says to me in the draft strategy is I want to get one of the elite receivers first round. But then after that, there's so many I like that I may try to grab 3 or 4 guys in the late rounds that I like, because the depth is it's crazy. And that's because the NFL is such a passing league now. And then also fantasy leagues. I don't know what your league does, but 3 receivers start in a lot of fantasy leagues now.
Yep.
And mine does. I remember, and last year, I won my $500 league. I freaking had Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, and A.J. Brown and Hunter Renfrow.
Wow. Yeah.
That'll never happen again. But regardless, the depth at receiver is staggering, and I think that affects draft strategy. And you want to talk about some breakout guys. There are a lot to get into. I'm going to let you start because I know there's a certain Baltimore Raven you're excited about.
Yeah, Rashad Bateman I really like. He's a guy I liked coming out of the draft last year. The Ravens picked him, and now Hollywood Brown is gone. And I get, like, the Ravens are not going to be a high-flying offense. Like, Lamar Jackson's probably going to pass for right around 3,000 yards, maybe 3,500 yards if we get a, high passing year. But 146 targets have been vacated, and there is no clear option for who's going to take them outside of Rashad Bateman. So Rashad Bateman is a guy that I've been banging the drum for. I like him this year. We're going to talk about depth. I have him ranked 21st, so it's not like I'm like crazy in love with this guy. But I think that based on value, I think he's going to be a great value. He's a guy you can get in the middle rounds, probably round 7, 8, etc. That could be a difference maker for you. I think he could be a solid wide receiver too.
Well, the first guy I'm going to mention got arrested recently, and that I didn't love that. Yeah. But I guess I thought more people would see this, and it's because his body breaks down a lot later in years. But the guy that Rashad Bateman is replacing and is going to Arizona, I love Hollywood Brown's situation in Arizona. DeAndre Hopkins is out the first 6 games. Christian Kirk's in Jacksonville. Yep. There's upheaval there. Hollywood Brown and Kyler Murray played college together and have a really good chemistry. Those games get wild in the desert, and you look at the target share, it's going to be him and Zach Ertz to start this year.
Yeah.
And the thing with him, the question I have with Hollywood Brown and Kyler Murray, it's like I think you could get a really good 4 to 6, maybe 8 weeks to start the year. I have questions about both of them as far as durability once you hit week 9 and week 10 and stretch run. But if he can keep himself out of jail, I really like the start that he could have just because he's already got that chemistry. And I think there's going to be some wild games in that West.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got him way higher than most people do, though. I've got like 16 or 17.
I don't have him ranked, but I do like him, especially to start the year. We'll talk about a little more about Cardinals receivers shortly. One guy that I am almost irrationally high on is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Okay. I have him ranked 11th.
Wow.
So the Lions are the Lions. I think they will be better this year, but the fact of the matter is they will likely be trailing in a lot of games. Amon-Ra St. Brown is a slot receiver. He's not a speedster. The Lions are looking and did address the wide receiver position in the offseason. They brought in some speedsters. They drafted Jameson Williams, who's likely going to be out till probably around Thanksgiving-ish, and they're not going to rush him back. First round pick, they traded way up for him. He tore his ACL in the national championship game. They also signed DJ Chark, another speedster LSU guy from Jacksonville. But that actually helps Amon-Ra St. Brown because that's going to remove, or essentially, I don't want to say take the top off the defense, but it's going to push those safeties back a little bit because they're going to have to account for that speed of DJ Chark and then eventually Jameson Williams. But Amon-Ra St. Brown, late round selection last year. I think he was like right around the 6th or 7th round. But last year, 119 targets, 90 catches as a rookie, 912 yards, 5 touchdowns. But looking towards the end of the season when he really came on, double-digit targets in his last 6 games.
Wow.
I'm going to say it again. Double-digit targets in his last 6 games. I think he had 10 in the final one. But before that, it was like 11 or 12 every single game. That's something I'm looking to grow. And this is kind of when the Lions started clicking. So if we think, and I don't want to put too much weight into like he had a good 2 to 3 games to finish the season. This is 6 games. That's a good sample size as far as a rookie. So I really like him. I have him 1 slot below Mike Evans.
Well, I remember last year on Dear Mr. Fantasy, which we've got big plans for on Sundays to get you ready for each NFL week's kickoff. You were riding him huge the last 5 or 6 weeks. And he was taking people, he was really, as a number 3 receiver at the end, he was super consistent, especially in PPR leagues. Well, the next guy I'm going to mention is a guy I'm all too familiar with because he got me to Barstool Sports, and he will always have a near and dear spot in my heart, and that is Elijah Moore, who caught the touchdown that beat Kentucky that inspired my video that somehow has me sitting here almost 2 years later. But when you look at Elijah Moore's rookie year last year with the Jets, obviously the quarterback situation was a mess. Zach Wilson struggled. Moore started out kind of struggling. There was a moment in week 1 where I was on a stream with Dave Portnoy, and I was just getting established at Barstool still kind of, so I didn't lose it. But Dave called Elijah Moore a bum one time when he didn't catch a long ball, and I was like, can I snap on Dave here or not? And I held it in. Yeah. Well, he proved he wasn't a bum. He remember the Thursday night game against the Colts? He really broke out last year, and he had a great 4 or 5 week stretch, and he was getting it going huge in the middle of the year, and then he went down with an injury for the rest of the year. However, I know you share a lot of the Jets' momentum for Zach Wilson in year 2. They added Garrett Wilson, so now you got him and Elijah Moore. You signed C.J. Azuma. You've got a few weapons. But I think Elijah Moore's skill set, he caught like 1 million balls at Ole Miss this last year. He's a great route runner out of the slot. He has a great feel. And now you're in year 2 as chemistry with Wilson. I think he's a huge breakout candidate. I got him number 21 on my receiver rankings. I think I'm thinking if he stays healthy, I think over 1,000 yards. I don't. It's always hard to say, but I think over 1,000 yards, a ton of catches, and 6 to 8 touchdowns are in play.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. Once we get past, I would say that you and I are aligned on our top 7. We just have them in a slightly different order. But after that, things kind of, get nuts as far as, we're talking the Tyreek Hills, Terry McLaurin, Mike Adams, or Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, like that range. Once it hits that, it's kind of a free for all. So I think there's a clear top 7. You and I are in agreement, not necessarily in the order, but Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, we both have as 5. We both love him this year. Deebo Samuel and Devontae Adams. Those are our top 7 guys. After that, it's a total hodgepodge. Another guy that I'm very high on, I have him number 12, and it is Hunter Renfrow.
Okay. He cracked my top 25 and won me a title last year. So tell me more. I definitely don't hate. He's a poor man's Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He is a really, really good receiver. 103 catches last year. They obviously brought in Devontae Adams, so it's like, all right, well, because Devontae Adams can line up in the slot sometimes. I don't think that's going to be Devontae Adams' main role, playing the slot in that offense, but Hunter Renfrow is a guy constantly involved, especially around the goal line and making tough catches. With Josh McDaniels as the head coach, you look at, Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, he's, coordinating those offenses. I don't want to say it's built around the slot receiver, because it's a lot around the slot receiver, a lot on the tight end. They really haven't had since, Randy Moss had, an X receiver that's like a Devontae Adams. But I do think Hunter Renfrow is going to continue to skyrocket in that offense, or in that offense this year. So I really like him. Derek Carr passed for 4,800 yards last year. There's a lot of yards to go around, and I love Hunter Renfrow.
And also, he doesn't even have to pay for an Uber with Derek Carr and Devontae Adams now. Did you see that yesterday? He's getting, so they were like they were getting in a car, and they're like, Hunter Renfrow's graduated the status where he doesn't have to pay for the Uber with us. It was really funny, really funny clip that I saw. Well, actually, that was last week. But no, I like Renfrow. The thing with Renfrow, the floor. Another guy that he's going to get a ton of targets. He has a great chemistry with Carr. You mentioned Josh McDaniel on the offense. He's not a guy that's going to be, if he stays healthy, he's not going to bust. And there's just so much to be said for that. And then the other thing with Renfrow, if you're a full point PPR, value even more. Yeah,
103 catches last year, 128 targets, 9 touchdowns. This is a guy who, I'm not going to put him as a wide receiver 1, even though he's, my 12th ranked. That kind of indicates that he is my absolute lowest ranked wide receiver 1, but he is a very solid wide receiver 2. You have him 25, I have him 12, so I'm very high on him.
My next guy I want to talk about on the breakout thing is he's now in his 2nd year off a torn ACL. He's got a quarterback change, and there's already been some injuries in their camp, but that's Cortland Sutton.
Yep.
He had a huge year. I guess it was the year before he tore his ACL.
Yep.
And then, the quarterback situation has been a mess in Denver literally since Peyton Manning's Super Bowl year. We're talking 7 or 8 years now. But Tim Patrick now out with the torn ACL. Jerry Jeudy, a guy I loved coming out of Alabama, has upside, but he hasn't proved it yet in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Sutton's number 1. He's also got great, I think the thing with him is his size in the red zone. I like, we're going to get to that later when we talk about our props, but I think he's in a situation with Russell Wilson where he's the number 1 guy. I think he can score a lot of touchdowns, and he's a guy I think if he can stay healthy, I'm pretty high on this year.
I like that. Let's talk about one more guy. We're both kind of aligned on him. I think we're both higher than a lot of the community on this one. That's DJ Moore.
Yes.
You have him wide receiver 11. I have him wide receiver 14. 163 targets last year.
Well, and the thing is with him, when I was breaking down DJ Moore last night, I mean, look at that quarterback situation last year. They had the ghost of Cam Newton out there the last 4 or 5 weeks.
Yep.
Darnold was throwing to him.
Yeah.
I mean, the quarterback situation was such a mess, and he still had the year he had. The thing with DJ Moore, too, his touchdown totals have been rough. But
each year.
But I think that he could get 6 to 8. Like, I feel like he gets so many targets. If they can score a few more points, I think he could get from, he's due on like your models. I mean, when you're getting 160 freaking targets, you're going to get in the end zone more than 4 times.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that 4 could become 8.
Yeah.
And you're looking at a 1,200-yard, 8 touchdown year. And the other thing with DJ Moore, he's not that sexy pick like a lot of these names are.
Yeah.
People don't want, I know McCaffrey's a big name, but nobody's hyped about the Mayfield-Darnold competition. And I feel like DJ Moore, I mean, if you could get him as your number 2 receiver with that target share, I mean, he's a hell of a player. Look, I think you and I both, I agree with you. I respect him.
2 guys. So 2 guys as a show, we're putting our full weight behind. CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, as a wide receiver 1, not necessarily 1 overall. We both have him 5th. And then DJ Moore, we're both much higher on him than the rest of the fantasy community.
Yeah, I agree. I've got one. So while we're at, I have another question. So fantasy, first round strategy. How many of these guys you comfortable? Say it's a 12-team league. How many of these guys in the first round are you comfortable with? I think 4.
I mean,
Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Devontae Adams. I'm fine with any of those guys as my first round pick. I know Adams is changing teams, but the McDaniel thing, the fact he has a chemistry with Carr, I feel, I don't know if he's going to be quite what he was with Aaron Rodgers, but I still feel he's going to be really good.
I think it's 7.
7.
And I think that based on our rankings, like if we're talking about Jonathan, and I am just not comfortable with the running backs this year.
No, I'm not either.
I'm taking Jonathan Taylor, and if I can't take Jonathan Taylor, I don't think I'm taking another running back in the first round.
Wow. You wouldn't take Eckler first round at all, like late 9th or 10th?
If it's PPR league, definitely.
Yeah.
Half point PPR league, probably, but I still don't feel great about it. He's my number 2 running back.
I know. That's why I asked.
So I would rather have my 7th wide receiver is Devontae Adams. I would rather have him, I think, than Austin Eckler.
So you also have Stephon Diggs, and that list is first round.
Yes.
See, my thing on Diggs, who don't get me wrong.
I'm 6.
I mean, I'm definitely, and you know what? CeeDee Lamb late first round. I don't have a problem with that.
Yep.
The thing with Diggs is my problem with Diggs isn't he's very talented. He's great. I just know that 2 years ago was his biggest year when he led the NFL in receiving.
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like, and then last year, you look at Buffalo, all of a sudden, you saw guys like, we'll talk Gabriel Davis, 200-yard, 4-touchdown game in the playoffs, him coming on. You got Dawson Knox.
Yep.
They're kind of spreading it out a little more. And, I think Diggs is still very solid, but I don't have him. I've got him behind my top 5.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about his year 2 years ago, 127 catches, 1,535 yards, 8 touchdowns. He had 166 targets that year.
Yeah.
Last year, he had 164. So I don't think that there's his catches went down from 127 to 103. His yards fell kind of in parallel, but his touchdowns went up. They went up from 8 to 10. So I absolutely think Stephon Diggs could be, right around that.
Josh Allen's not getting any worse either.
No, not at all. All right, so let's talk about, we talked about breakout guys. Let's talk about a couple guys to avoid. Who do you really not like and would not touch this year?
Okay, so I'm going to get flamed for this because he's one of my Ole Miss guys, but I don't like A.J. Brown this year.
I don't either.
And I've been, I've had him on my teams the last few years.
Yeah.
I've beat the horse that Tannehill is better than people think. I mean, I've had A.J. a lot the last 3 years, and he's been great. I mean, he led me to 2 or 3 years championships.
Yep.
However, there's a lot this year. Philly, number 1 rushing offense in the NFL last year. Remember last year, the first 4 or 5 weeks, and they were dropping Hurts back all the time.
Yeah.
We were like, what the hell is Nick Sirianni doing?
Yep.
Well, he figured that out, and they started running the ball, and they ended up in the playoffs.
Yep.
But not just like the running thing. Hurts is an inconsistent passer. You've got Devontae Smith on the other side. You've got Dallas Goedert. I mean, that's a lot of mouths to feed for the number 1 rushing offense in the NFL. I mean, I think in an ideal world here, Hurts is throwing 25 passes a game.
Yeah.
And plus A.J. Brown, who, incredibly talented, but Will Compton said it. He's got one of those wide receiver body types that you see that, the super freak athletes that battle hammy problems and all kinds of stuff. They have like the fast twitch stuff.
Yep.
And his over-under is 1,500 this year, which isn't that high, but I'm just, I love A.J. Brown in real life, but I've got the dodge on him in fantasy. Most people have him ranked 12th or 13th, and I got him 19th or 20th.
Yeah, you have him 19th. I have him 17th. I mean, we look at, let's see, his final... Jalen Hurts' final 9 games, he's averaging, and this is including the playoffs, 187 passing yards a game. So They obviously have invested a lot in the wide receiver position. They're paying A.J. Brown a ton of money. They drafted Devontae Smith first round over Micah Parsons, I should say. They have obviously invested a lot. They are waiting to see what Jalen Hurts can be. If they stick to this, very much low volume passing attack and just running the ball, that is not good for any Eagles wide receiver. So I am absolutely avoiding A.J. Brown if possible. I mean, I have him ranked in my top 25, but when we look at 187 yards a game, he needs over 50%.
And there's another good receiver and a tight end.
Yes.
It's not the Baltimore situation where it's clearly one receiver and one tight end.
Yes. So I am not high in A.J. Brown at all this year. We are, as a show, much lower on him, so I'm glad we're aligned there. A guy that I would be looking to avoid that you are very high on. Let's see. It's kind of tough. I am not as high on Michael Pittman Jr. as you are.
Okay.
You have him ranked 12th overall. I do not have him in my top 25.
Okay. I just think he's going to be solid. I mean, I don't think he's a guy that's going to get you 1,500 yards, but I think he's just going to be like their number one guy because of lack of other options. And I think you're getting over 1,000 yards and like 7 or 8 touchdowns. And I think the floor is pretty high.
Yeah. I think, after you get to 17, like all these guys are somewhat interchangeable.
No, I think that's what I was saying was so fascinating about it. We hadn't even gotten into the 30s and 40s yet, where I think that like you can really show off your chops as a fantasy manager with some of the guys, the upside.
Yeah. Or here's one guy that we were very different on. You have him wide receiver 17. He finished wide receiver 11 last year. I do not have him in my top 25, and that's DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I was all over the map with DK. His over-under is only 925.5.
Yeah.
Seattle, it's kind of, honestly, I mean, this kind of feels like a year where you just almost avoid all the Seahawks. Lockett had such a good chemistry with Wilson. Like they were just so in sync. I just don't see how this is good for him. Rashad Penny broke out big the last 3 or 4 games. They did improve the O-line, but now you got Kenneth Walker coming in there. What's that going to mean?
Yep.
DK just got a large bag of money as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm always going to like him. I think the thing with DK that's frustrating in fantasy, and I don't know how you are as a fantasy owner, but like I love having guys, Hunter Renfrow, classic example. Mm-hmm. You're getting your 8 to 15. DK is going to score 2 or he's going to score 30.
Yeah, he had a monster, I think it was championship game against the Lions, week 17, where he scores 3 touchdowns. Great.
But you don't know what you're getting week to week. And the problem is at the end of the year, you look at these point totals and, I know they take different roads to get there, but when I'm trying to put together a really winning championship roster, steadiness is good where you can rely on stuff. And those boomer bust type guys that can score, I mean, they kill you. When DK has a 2-catch, 18-yard game, he kills you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think he'll end up having a pretty solid year, but it's going to be a roller coaster. And, even though I've got him 17th, he's probably not going to be in my teams.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Tyler Lockett because this is one guy that it's really tough to say to avoid him because every year he is underrated. I actually did a study looking at the last 3 years of positional drop off from rounds 1 through 6 and looking at receivers and just trying to see where the value is. And there's always one receiver in the 5th round of drafts that or at least one, sometimes 2 to 4 that make a big splash. So in 2019, it was Cooper Kupp. He was, at ADP wide receiver 21. He finished as wide receiver 4. Also that year, Tyler Lockett was going for wide receiver 20 in ADP, finished wide receiver 13. Let me know if you notice a trend. 2020, DK Metcalf drafted as wide receiver 22, finished as wide receiver 7. Robert Woods drafted as wide receiver 21, finished wide receiver 13. Tyler Lockett drafted wide receiver 18 ADP, finished wide receiver 9. 2021, Deontay Johnson drafted wide receiver 2, finished wide receiver 9. Tyler Lockett drafted wide receiver 19, finished wide receiver 13. 3 years in a row, Tyler Lockett has been underrated, been taken in the 5th rounds of drafts, and finished way higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, the consistency, he's a great route runner. He's an awesome PPR guy, but I mean, I just can't get over the Drew Lock thing. I mean, I just feel like when I used to watch Russell Wilson and Lockett, their chemistry and how in sync they were was up there with anybody in the NFL. And I just think, Seattle, so there's all this stuff came out about their thoughts on Drew Lock. They really looked at him in the draft. They were real high on him. He was in this thing. I don't know, man. I feel like they're seeing something I'm not, and I think it's going to be rough.
I'm not crazy high on him. I'm not I have to, based on those numbers, I have to have him in my top 25. I have him as wide receiver 23, sandwiched in between Deontay Johnson and Allen Robinson. But though that's kind of where I just cannot, based on the previous years, and I know the quarterback is gone, I can't leave him out of there. I have him ranked above DK Metcalf.
Okay.
One guy that is a potential lightning rod for players to avoid, a guy I'm certainly avoiding, Michael Thomas.
Yes,
The New Orleans Saints.
the traditional. I will say this. Last year we had it out about him, and year one, I could see Mr. Cheah, you were the winner.
Let me
Considering he played 0 downs.
let me bring up my. So he is going to be in my favorite props for under 5.5 receiving yards,
Touchdowns.
or sorry, under 5.5 touchdowns. Michael Thomas has not scored a regular season touchdown since before the pandemic. Let that sink in. A regular season touchdown. He has not scored one since before the pandemic. This is before Tom Brady landed in Tampa. This is before a lot of things. I think it was November or December 2019 is his last regular season touchdown.
Look, here's my thing on Mike Thomas. All right, he had he got hurt week 1 of 2020 against the Bucs, and he tried to play through it. He's not a guy that's a burner by any.
Because you guys tried to run it up. I should know.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course.
You guys have your starters in. You guys are up.
Of course, we're trying.
A bunch of points. You run Alvin Kamara. He gets rolled up on incidentally.
I mean, all this may be true, but I just think the thing with Mike Thomas, he got that huge bag of money. He was the first. He got the 5-year, $100 million deal that kind of was like the first receiver, $100 million, where that started all. And then he got hurt that week 1 of 2020. Last offseason was bizarre. Like the stuff I heard from behind the scenes was he elected to get a surgery that his camp told him to get, that the Saints told him he was getting the wrong one. And then the Saints ended up being right. And he got like the wrong surgery. Remember, he showed up in June needing that surgery instead of February. Ended up having a lost year, strained the crap out of his relationship with the organization, to put it mildly. Really pissed Sean Payton off. The thing with him, though, because of the last 2 years being totally lost, he's got to have a good year if he wants to keep making money in the NFL. His ass is on the line this year, and he knows it. And when you look at the Saints thing, like Jameis throws for yards.
He's a
you got him. You got Olave, who I'm excited about, that can stretch the field. I think Jarvis Landry is going to be good in the slot. Look, I'm not sitting here telling you, Mike. I've got him ranked 21, and I just think his over-under is 875.5. I think he gets over 1,000 yards, and he's going to be solid. Is he going to catch 140-something balls or whatever? Drew Brees threw nothing but throw it from up to out. He dumped it to Alvin Kamara, he threw it to Mike Thomas, and that was the entire passing offense. That was it. I don't think Winston's a guy who pushes it more down the field. I don't know if you're not going to see just never-ending slants to Mike Thomas for 7 yards, which was literally the Saints' offense with Brees in 19. But I do think Thomas will be the number one. Olave is going to be the deep threat, and Landry's going to be the guy in the slot. And I think there's value for all three of them with Jameis Winston.
Okay. One guy, I forgot to touch on in players to avoid. What do we think about DeAndre Hopkins, a guy who was a wide receiver 1 going into last year? He's suspended for the first 6 games. How do you feel about that?
Man, the thing about him was the performance last year down the stretch wasn't great either. It's one thing if you take a guy who's suspended, but he was like a hyped up as a top 5 receiver last year, and it kind of, early on he was doing pretty well, but it didn't really happen.
572 yards, 8 touchdowns.
I mean, I think that I don't know, man. I don't. He's a lot of times you go into a draft, and you're like, oh, I can get this guy who's going to come back in week 7 and help me, and I'm a good, but I don't know that I'm that hyped about him right now.
He's a guy that I would look to target late in drafts. And I'm not talking about, round 5 or round 6. I'm talking if we get into, round 9, round 10, because, it's the year 2020. He's playing for the Cardinals. He's got 1,400 yards, 6 touchdowns. He improved his touchdown number last year in 6 fewer games.
Shows how fluky the touchdown thing is.
Kyler Murray looks for him all the time in the red zone. As a guy who was a big DeAndre Hopkins manager last year, he looks for him all the time in the red zone. He just had kind of an off year, and then obviously got popped for what he's calling trace amounts of some substance that's not illegal, but had some type of hint of something that was. So unfortunately, he'll be out, but I think he could go on a tear the last 11 games of the year.
The thing that's interesting is I talked about the Hollywood Brown thing and how I like him early in the year. If you do go Hollywood Brown, you might want to snap. I could see like Hollywood Brown
like
being
wide receiver handcuff.
Yeah. Like Hollywood Brown could be good early and then Hopkins come on late. Like I could kind of see something like that. But, I do think if you have faith and, you have to have faith in your ability as a fantasy owner. But if you feel like you're going to be in playoff contention and do good, that isn't a bad idea because you're going to, at worst case, if you're starting 3 receivers, he's a starting receiver no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you can get that in round 10 or 11, I think it's worth looking at. I got to ask about one fascinating team that has 2 guys that we hadn't touched on yet. And what do we make of the Tyreek Hill Waddle situation with Tua in Miami? Because that's a fascinating one. I mean, Tyreek's been a first-round pick the last few years with Mahomes. Obviously, I don't expect it to be the same thing without Patrick Mahomes and KC. And then the Waddle, I mean, his target share, good God, last year. I mean, he was getting like 15 a game. They hire McDaniel, who, we saw the way he used Debo. These guys could be getting carries. They're going to be in motion. They're going to be getting the ball in short passes. What do you make of Tyreek Hill and Waddle in fantasy? I'm kind of inclined to just kind of sit back and avoid them and just see what happens.
I think that they could be pretty good. I am hedging a bit. So we'll kind of transition this into our rankings. We went over our top 7. You have, I'll read off your order. Cooper Kupp 1, Justin Jefferson 2, Jamar Chase 3, Devontae Adams 4. You're a little higher on him than me. We both have CeeDee Lamb 5. You have Stephon Diggs 6, and then you have Deebo Samuel 7. So those are our consensus top 7. But yeah, once you get past this, it's kind of like the Tyreek Hill area. I do have Tyreek Hill as wide receiver 8. You have him as 10. I think that's both fair. I think we can both agree there's a big, like the tiers change.
Well, I'm just more concerned. Like I have more faith in Adams playing with Derek Carr in Vegas than I do with Tyreek going to Miami with Tua. And I do think like you'll see a lot of short crosses and Tua's going to get the ball out quick. They're getting these guys to get the ball in their hands. But the thing with Tyreek, when you had him in fantasy, you were always sitting around saying there could be a 75-yard touchdown on the next play that can break open fantasy weeks. And I just don't know that that's going to be the case in this Miami offense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we are certainly a little bit different. So you have, again, Tyreek Hill 10. I have him 8. Jaylen Waddle, I have 19. You have 20. So we're kind of in a similar boat there.
Yeah.
He's not a guy that I'm actively pursuing as a wide receiver 2, even though he falls kind of in the lower spectrum of that for me. He's somewhat interchangeable with a lot of guys. I have him like right around AJ Brown, Chris Godwin, T. Higgins.
I'm in same thoughts. It's just fascinating as a schematically, though. We've never seen a team with like 2 receivers like this.
Yep.
And so what are they going to, what's it going to be like?
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to be running these motions. I mean, it's going to be a nightmare for defenses to account for. I can tell you that.
Yeah. All right. So let's go through some other rankings. So again, the tier 2 and kind of where I see the change. Tyreek Hill 8. I'm high on Terry McLaurin.
No, I am too. I'm 13th. And I remember last year on this preview thing, I was bashing him, and he really showed me, because last year there wasn't anybody else to take the targets. And now, I know you're going to get into you like Dotson a lot out of Penn State, who was really good. And if he can step up and just give him anything, that's going to help McLaurin. Yeah, no, absolutely. So high on Terry McLaurin. Mike Evans I have as 10. I was actually talking him up a lot more. I was just at Bucs camp, and he's going to be great. But what surprised me was I think Chris Godwin is going to be ready a lot earlier. Additionally, I think that I heard that Russell Gage has been impressing, that he has picked up the playbook and he is good. And the thing that was really surprising was one of the things that everyone to a person told me that was there was, dude, Julio is that guy. Like he is legit. He's way better than we thought. So while I do love Evans, I believe he has 27 touchdowns the last 2 seasons with Tom Brady, and I could absolutely see him being right in that range again. I am comfortable with him as a low end wide receiver 1, but he would not be a first round fantasy pick for me. Okay. And he's not had like bad injury history, but he does have a hamstring get nicked up. I mean, it seems like there's a couple weeks every year where he's trying to play through it.
Yep. Then, as I mentioned, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown, 11, Hunter Renfrow, 12. Mike Williams, a guy we're both high on.
Thing with him is health. He stays healthy. He's so good in the red zone. And Herbert is not getting worse.
Yep.
And, I just, his upside, he's just had a lot of back problems through the years and stuff. But when he's on the field,
he was wide receiver, I believe, 1 for the first couple weeks of the season last year. So he was kind of in that top 3 for a while and then kind of trailed off towards the end. And kind of, how do you see this kind of tier 2 shaking out?
I think the tier 2, the thing, I guess, are you okay? You're saying that ends around, I'm guessing I'm ending it around McLaurin. I think my tier 2 is kind of, we said our top 7's the same. I've got Keenan Allen 8. I'd say it's like 8 through 13. It's kind of my tier 2. I've got McLaurin at the top of it. And then I've got like the Marquise Brown, T. Higgins, Mike Williams, DK, Cortland Sutton, AJ. I feel like that's the third tier to me. There's a lot of those guys that I'm probably not going to have this year.
Right. Okay.
But the thing is that you could make an argument that tier 3 is like 13 or 14 through 35 or 40.
Yes.
Because usually we get on here and we get our top 25 rankings. But man, I was looking at 35 and 40. Like 2 guys that I talked about last night I want to ask about, I don't know what Allen Lazard's going to do, but he's the number 1 receiver for Aaron Rodgers.
Yep.
I have no idea what's going to happen with Juju Smith-Schuster, but damn, what an opportunity with Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
You could have Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers as number 1 receivers is like your number 5 receiver this year.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's bananas to me.
Yes. And there was that quote on Pro Football Talk that said, Allen Lazard wants to be wide receiver 1 in all of football. It's like, all right, let me know when that happens.
Yeah, no, I think that's a little bit of a stretch, but could he, have 1,000 yards and 7 or 8? And he's a guy that could catch touchdowns too.
I'd almost be surprised if he didn't have 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
Like they just don't have.
Somebody's got to catch the damn ball. Aaron Rodgers is going to throw it, Yeah. And so, I don't know. There's just so much depth at this position, and that's my thing. And when it comes, I really think you're going to show your chops in a fantasy draft this year with like who you end up as your 4th or 5th receivers, because I think that you could really build a lot of depth there this year.
Yeah. So I'm in agreement. I have my tier 2 is very short. It's Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans. After that, it kind of gets into a bit of a hodgepodge. And then my tier 3 does start off with Amon St. Brown, Hunter Renfrow, and Mike Williams, DJ Moore. And then I have Keenan Allen. So mine is a little bit unconventional, but I think that I'm kind of betting on these guys' upside, and I do like kind of the way that they're ascending, and I think that they're undervalued. So if I walked away from my fantasy draft and I went, Travis Kelce early, 2 quarterback league, and I'm drafting good quarterbacks early and some, I get a running back somewhere like an Antonio Gibson that I like, I would be very comfortable with an Amon St. Brown, Hunter Renfrow, Mike Williams, DJ Moore receiver room. I think that would be incredible. Well,
and the thing too is you can get 4 or 5 guys to start at 3 spots very easily too.
Yeah, and those guys are going to be valued in the 20s in a lot of drafts. So I think that's not like a stretch as far as getting those guys. All right, you want to go into some futures?
Yes, we've doing this. So check out the Barstool Sports book. It's under player props now.
Yep.
They updated that. I saw in the last week.
Yep.
But you can check out the player props. And what they have is they either list the yardage or the touchdown thing. And so if you want to see the other one, you got to click on more bets on the players, which I honestly wish was a little more aesthetically pleasing, but regardless, they've got them up everywhere. And you and I, we did the running backs last week. We're going to do our receivers today, and then we're going to kind of go back and do quarterback and tight ends. And we're each preparing 5. And I don't know about you, I had 11 or 12, and I had a really hard time trimming it to 5 last night.
Yeah. I have 6. I'm just going to piggyback off of one of yours. That's the same. But I want to note, we do our homework on this. Last year on player props that were not like MVP or defensive player of the year, things like that, just yardage things, I was 12-4, 75%. Damn. So I feel very good about these. I have one lock I'm going to give out. I'm going to save that one for the end. But Mintzy, what do you like? What's your favorite receiver prop?
Man, favorite. I'm just starting with over 11.50.5 on CeeDee Lamb.
Yep.
The target share, Amari Cooper's out. Dak's going to throw it. It's year 2 now. I think that's way too low for what I think we're heading for 1,300 or 1,400 yards here.
Yeah. I don't mind him for, I think it's like plus 900 for offensive player of the year. Like, I think he could be,
if it breaks right for him, it could break really right.
Yeah. The one concern that I have is he got a concussion last year and he wasn't really the same guy after it, but so much time has passed. I don't think that should be a lingering issue going into this year. One that I like, the lock I'll say for the end, Amon-Ra St. Brown over 800.5 receiving yards.
I looked at that.
Minus 125 in the Barstool Sports book. That is one that I really like. And again, I have him as wide receiver 11. So obviously I'm very high on the guy.
Next one I've got is over. I mentioned Cortland Sutton earlier and me liking him. I think 5.5 is just an egregiously low touchdown total for him with his size. And I think they're going to score more points than Russell Wilson this year. And so if he stays healthy, he's going to score 6 or 8 touchdowns.
I like that. I like Hunter Renfrow over 825.5.
That was another one that I almost had.
825.5 receiving yards. I mean, again, I have this guy as wide receiver 12. Last year, I mean, he had 119 targets, he was 103 catches last year, but he finished with like 912 yards, I think. Or remember, he just finished.
I think it was like slightly over 1,000.
And 9 touchdowns. So, I mean, for him to see that much of a decrease, I do not see happening with the type of offense that they're bringing in. So I love that prop for Hunter Renfrow.
Over 775.5 with my guy, Elijah Moore. I talked about it here. I think, I know there's going to be a lot of talk about Garrett Wilson because he was a high first-round pick, but Moore's in year 2 now with Zach Wilson. Moore is also he's just a guy that can get a lot of volume because he can catch it out of the slot and he can run a lot of short routes. He's quick. I think Wilson's going to be your take the top off down the field guy, which Zach Wilson will certainly use.
Yep.
But I think Moore is the guy you want in fantasy this year. And if he stays healthy, 775.5 is nothing.
Yep. I touched on it before, but Michael Thomas under 5.5 receiving touchdowns. I mean, the guy hasn't scored a touchdown since before the pandemic. Getting 6 receiving touchdowns, I think, is a stretch. Let's see if he's actually on the field. I saw that he was running routes in training camp. Big difference from playing on Sundays. So give me the Michael Thomas under receiving touchdowns.
I wouldn't touch the touchdown prop, but I do have over 775.5 yards on him. Look, he has to prove it this year. I mean, if he wants to keep making big money in the NFL, he has to have a big year this year. Literally. I mean, there's no choice. And Jameis is going to throw for yards. And I like having Olave and Landry. It's not – last year that Saints receiving core was – I mean, it was an atrocity. It was an embarrassment to watch. I mean, Marquez Callaway was the number 1 going into week 1. But now that you've got Thomas, Landry, and Olave, I think – I could see a season where Thomas has 1,000 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns. I could see that. I see that. I like him on the yardage way more than I like the touchdowns.
He's never been a double-digit touchdown guy in his career. He's had 9 touchdowns. He's had 5 touchdowns playing, a full 16 games his second year in the league, which he made the Pro Bowl. 104 catches, 1,245 yards, 5 touchdowns. Then, his 2 big years, 1,405 yards, 9 touchdowns, then 1,725, 9 touchdowns, but obviously hasn't scored a regular season touchdown since then.
All right. What you got next?
I like Terry McLaurin over 960.5 receiving yards. I'm just really high on the guy. I have him as my wide receiver 9. I think he's in for a really big year. He has been a 1,000-yard receiver before. I don't see there's any reason why he can't. He was playing with Taylor Heineke. So, I mean, this is a guy who is going to see a massive, massive improvement. He got a ton of targets last year and just didn't convert a lot of them. And I think that Wentz, moving from Heineke to Wentz, is going to help that a lot.
My 5th one, I'm calling an audible here because you kind of talked me out of my Lockett thing because I was worried about Tyler Lockett. I still don't like him in fantasy because the Drew Lock thing, but he's just the consistency thing. I'm going ahead and taking Cooper Kupp over again. I think he's still under, even though he's the number 1 receiver. I mean, you mentioned it. He got at least 90 yards in 16 of 17 games. He had 1,900. His total's, I believe, 1,350.5. Mm-hmm. He beat it by 550 yards last year. Yeah. That is a huge margin. Like, he can come down from 1,900 to 1,500 or 1,400. You still win here. I mean, if he stays healthy, you're winning, period. Yep. So I'm on it. How you can be the number 1 receiver and we say number 2 overall pick and still be underrated is beyond me.
Yeah. And this one I have as my lock of the year. I didn't think that this was going to be my pick. This guy just signed with the team a week ago. I spent some time down in Tampa. And again,
drinking the Kool-Aid.
There are a couple reasons for this. So, as I said, everyone's telling me, and for real, like they'll tell me if a guy stinks. They're like, Julio is way better than we thought. That combined with Chris Godwin, I think is going to play week 1. They're not going to rush him back. So he's not going to be handling a full workload week 1. So Julio is going to get some time. But what makes this appealing? So Julio Jones over 550.5 receiving yards. And this is why this is my lock. Because of his contract. His contract is he gets incentives for every 100 yards he gets starting at 600. So at 600 receiving yards, he gets $250,000. At 700 receiving yards, he gets another $250,000. At 800 receiving yards, he gets another $250,000. And at 900 receiving yards, he gets another $250,000. So we're looking at $1 million to get to 900 receiving yards. Now, what I know about this team, and this is not widely publicized, Byron Leftwich will ask the players who has incentives starting around week 14.
I remember the Evans getting to 1,000 last year.
Exactly. So that was a record thing, which was important to him, and that hit. This one is an incentive-based thing. You see NFL Wired clips with Gronk talking about he needs one more catch to get this, and they go throw him the ball. They are going to get Julio Jones at least 600 yards receiving this year. He's going to get this. The line is 550 is at minus 112. It is my lock of the year for all of those reasons.
I would love to go back and get the Steven Cheah last year clip of Julio saying old and injured players stay old and injured. Because I remember that was a specific quote. But we'll see. He's in a situation, getting to play with Brady, obviously hoping to compete for a Super Bowl championship, and he has a good role. This seems like a good rejuvenation spot in Florida for him. My thing on him, the way they treated Gronk the last couple of years, I think they may treat Julio where he if they're winning the division, they could take him. He could be missing a couple games, weeks 11 through 13, being real careful. But we'll see. 550.5 is the thing with that. We're talking about averaging 33 yards a game. That's not a lot. That's not a lot. So he could get there playing 11 or 12 games if he's getting targets.
As long as he's playing towards the end of the year, if he honestly misses the first 10 weeks of the season and plays the last 7, I'm confident they're going to get him that based on based on that question from Byron Leftwich, who has incentives. He obviously knows what that is. In fairness, Julio's last 2 years, he played 9 games for Atlanta, 771 yards. He played 10 games for Tennessee, 434 yards. So if we're looking at last year, he didn't hit it. But we're talking about going from Ryan Tannehill to Tom Brady. I think if he even plays 10 games, that's worth 117 yards.
Okay. All right. Well, I like it. Do you have any last thing before we part? Any other rookies? Do you have any you're looking at more than others?
I don't love the rookies as much to make an impact this year. If there's one, I think it's going to be Garrett Wilson.
Okay.
With the Jets. Drake London's obviously going to see a ton of targets. I do not have him ranked in my top 25. Their quarterback situation I don't love. Kyle Pitts is going to be a second-year guy there. Already gets a ton of targets, but I know that you're high on Chris Olave.
Yeah, of course I am Olave because I think his route running, I think he – the comp I used at Ohio State, and I'm not saying he's going to be this because the dude's top 3 in the NFL, but he reminded me of Justin Jefferson watching him in college a lot. Mm-hmm. And for the fact that the Saints traded up so much to get him, they think very highly of him. I also think the Superdome and the turf is very friendly for fantasy.
Yep.
And Winston's going to throw for yards. Now, the thing is, his over-under was 700.5. I looked at the over, but you do have Mike Thomas and Landry in him. I don't know how it's all going to break, but I think I like – What's up?
Michael Thomas won't be there.
Well, then you probably like Olave then. But, I think Olave is worth looking at late because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see what Christian Watson does, too, in Green Bay.
Yeah, well, I feel like the thing with White, got to mention Sky Moore. I'm sorry I forgot that because he's got the Tyreek Hill role. He's like a guy late in the draft. Take a far on him. If you have to cut him, who cares? Because the upside. If the 1 out of 10 shot that it breaks really right is worth taking in the 11th round. I can tell you that.
Yeah, we're taping this August 4th. He did limp off yesterday. I don't think it's going to be major, but
he still needs to be out there learning the playbook coming from the MAC.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, this was a fun edition of our wide receiver preview. Something we look forward to doing every year. In my mind, the most important position in fantasy football right now.
Well, I think it's just the consistency level from the receiver position. Running backs, that's why the 0 running back strategy you employ is good because you never know who's going to be on the field. You can manage the waiver wire. You can find starters late. You can find PPR guys.
Yep.
When you get top receivers, they're going to be playing. They're consistent. And look, I agree. I think I won champion. That's what won it for me last year was that receiving core. So,
yep.
I agree.
All right. So good luck to everyone drafting, which could be coming up. But for Ben Mintz, Steven Cheah. So this was fun.
Oh, yeah. Follow us at FFF Pod on Twitter and Instagram and check out player props on the Barstool Sportsbook.
See you guys.